Story 1. The Rest Stop That Stayed Open. I still catch myself replaying the part with the headlights. Not because they were bright, but because they were wrong. They came in low and slow from the dark field side, from the side where there wasn't supposed to be a road at all. I remember standing there with my journal still tucked under my arm, staring through that smeared window, waiting for the outline of a car to appear behind them. It never did. That was the moment I understood I hadn't pulled into a lucky empty stop. I'd pulled into a place that had been waiting to see if I would stay. The first thing I saw was the light, not the building, not the lot, just those two pale circles drifting toward the rest stop from the wrong side of Interstate 70. Moving across the black field like something had found a way around the rules everybody else uses. I was standing inside by the vending machines when I noticed them through the front window. My hand was still on a bottle of water I hadn't paid for yet, and I remember the glass on the machine door was cold enough to sting my fingertips. Outside, the lot was empty. I'd checked it twice because that was the whole reason I'd stopped in the first place. No cars, no trucks, no RVs, not even one of those half-broken maintenance pickups you see at places like that. But the headlights were there anyway, inching closer. I didn't wait to understand it. I just grabbed my keys so hard the ridges bit into my palm, left the bottle where it was, and pushed through the front doors into that dry Kansas air that always smells like dust, even in the middle of the night. The fluorescent lights over the entrance buzzed like trapped insects. Gravel popped under my shoes. I got to my Subaru, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside hard enough to hit my shoulder on the center console. By the time the engine turned over, those lights had stopped moving. I didn't look back again until I was already pulling onto the highway. This was a few years ago, early fall, when I was doing one of those solo trips that sound more thoughtful and meaningful before you actually spend 10 hours alone with gas, station coffee, and your own brain. My name's Nora Keene. I was 22 then, fresh out of school, and I had this idea that driving cross-country by myself would make me feel braver than I was. I actually liked being alone on the road. I kept a little handwritten journal in the side pocket of my backpack, one of those black soft-cover notebooks that always end up warped from weather. And at every stop I wrote down where I was, what time it was, what I ate, anything funny or weird I noticed. It started as a way to remember the trip and turned into a habit fast. That night I was heading west through Kansas, cutting across the long empty part past Hays, already tired of the same straight ribbon of highway and the same dark flat nothing on either side. It was just after midnight. I was low enough on fuel that I wanted to top off at the next exit, and when I saw the blue sign for a rest area with fuel listed nearby, I took it without thinking much about it. I remember being relieved. The kind of relieved you get when you've been telling yourself for the last 20 miles that you could go another 20 if you had to. The place looked usable. That was the word I would have written. Not nice, not clean, just usable. Low concrete building, vending area, restroom signs, overhead lights still on. The air outside had that stale disinfectant smell leaking out through the entrance, mixed with dry grass and old asphalt holding on to the day's heat. I parked under one of the lamps, stretched my legs, and wrote the location in my journal while sitting in the driver's seat. Western Kansas, just after midnight, quick stop only. I remember that much because I wrote it neatly. The first odd thing was the silence. Not total silence, the fluorescent buzzing, a faraway rush from trucks still moving on the interstate, the hollow clink of the flagpole line tapping against metal. But there were no voices, no doors, no engines cooling, none of the human mess you expect at a stop that's technically open. I still took it as a win. Empty meant quick. Inside, the vending machines were lit up but wrong somehow. They showed rows of drinks and snacks, but the price strips were blank, just narrow, pale windows with nothing in them. I thought maybe the digital display had gone out. The stale chemical smell was stronger in there, mixed with something papery and dry like old cardboard. The restroom doors farther down the hall were both propped open with identical gray rubber wedges. Same angle, same placement, I noticed because I notice repeating things. I remember smiling to myself and thinking some cleaner had probably gotten lazy and left them there. That fit fine with everything else. Late shift. Skeleton crew. Nothing to worry about. I even said something out loud, just to hear a normal voice in that building. Convenient, I think. Something dumb like that. I checked the maintenance board mounted near the hall. It had a laminated sheet under cloudy plastic with a service date from years earlier. Not months, years. The corners of the paper were crisp, though, like it had been printed last week. I stood there a second longer than I should have, trying to make that make sense, then laughed it off. Maybe they reused the sign frame. Maybe nobody cared enough to replace the insert. That felt exactly like the kind of boring explanation these places always have. I went to wash my hands even though I hadn't used the restroom yet. The faucet squealed before the water came out. It ran lukewarm and metallic smelling, the kind of water that makes your skin feel less clean afterward. Over the sinks there was a round wall clock with a white face and a red second hand. I only looked at it because I wanted to note the time in my journal more exactly. The second hand twitched backward. Not a full sweep, just little backward jumps, one tick at a time, like it was correcting itself in reverse. I frowned at it, counted under my breath, and watched it do it again. I told myself the motor was dying. I told myself cheap clocks do weird things. I told myself if I started assigning meaning to broken stuff in a highway rest stop, I'd never finish this drive. That's honestly how my brain works. I like good explanations. I prefer them. If there's a friendly version of events and a bad version of events, I go with the friendly one first, and usually pretty hard. So I dried my hands on that awful brown paper that feels like it was made from grocery bags, and I went back out into the hall like everything had been filed away correctly. That's when I heard the engine. It started outside with that rough, low turnover sound an older car makes when it catches on the second try. Very clear, very close. I could have sworn it was right out in the lot, maybe 2 spaces over from where I'd parked. I looked through the front windows immediately. Nothing. The lot was still empty. My Subaru sat under the light by itself, dusty and unimpressive, journal visible on the passenger seat. No moving shadows, no taillights, no one pulling in. I stood there listening. The engine sound kept going for a few seconds, idling low, then stopped. I can still explain parts of that if I try. Sound carries strangely out on flat land. Maybe it came from the highway. Maybe from the gas station I'd passed half a mile back at the exit. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. All of those are possible. What made it different was that each explanation felt thinner than the one before it. Like I wasn't choosing the most likely answer anymore. I was choosing whichever answer let me stay calm for another minute. I picked up a bag of pretzels just to have a reason to linger near the vending machines and act normal. The plastic crackled loudly in the building. My own movement sounded borrowed. I reached for my journal, meaning to jot down the backward clock because I thought future me would find it funny. And then I noticed I hadn't brought the journal in after all. It was still in the car. That bothered me more than it should have. I was weirdly careful with that notebook. Every stop got written down. That was the rule. I pushed back through the front doors and the air outside hit me like the inside of an empty paper bag, dry and cool at once. I walked to the car, opened the passenger door, and grabbed the journal. When I looked up again, I saw tire marks in the dirt beyond the edge of the lot. Not in the lot. Past it. There was a narrow service strip of packed earth between the building and the field, and then just scrub grass and darkness. The marks looked fresh. 2 pale arcs pressed into the dirt, curving toward the side of the building as if a vehicle had come around back where no vehicle was supposed to be. I crouched and touched one without thinking. The dirt was loose and still crumbling inward. That was the first moment I stopped feeling mildly weird and started feeling watched, even though I couldn't have said by who. My stomach tightened in that small, hard way it does before an exam, except there was no test coming that I understood. I straightened up too fast and hit my head lightly on the top of the passenger door frame. I remember the quick white burst in my vision and the stupid flash of annoyance. It almost helped. Pain makes things feel ordinary. I should have gotten in and left right there. Instead, I told myself there had to be a maintenance road. Something staff used. Maybe someone had cut around the back. Maybe the place wasn't as empty as it looked. I even liked that explanation because it meant there were employees nearby, which meant people, which meant safety. So I went back inside again. The front doors didn't resist at all. That's another thing I hate remembering. They opened too easily, like they'd been used a lot that night. Except by who. I walked farther down the hall this time, past the restrooms, calling out a little. Hello? Not dramatic, just polite, the way you call into the back of a store when you're not sure someone saw you come in. No answer. The air changed near the back corridor. Cooler. Doustier. There was a faint smell under the disinfectant now, something sweet and old, like fruit left in a glove compartment too long. One of the overhead bulbs down there flickered with a soft electrical click. I could hear my shoes squeaking against the waxed tile, and behind that there was another sound I couldn't place at first, a tiny repetitive tapping. It was the rubber wedges. Both restroom doors, propped open the same exact amount, were shifting slightly every time the building air kicked on, tapping against tile in perfect rhythm. Identical movement, identical sound. I don't know why that got to me, but it did. I checked the women's room first. Empty stalls, one paper towel in the sink, mirror spotted with dried droplets, the clock over the sink still ticking backward. I backed out and looked into the men's room from the doorway. Same layout, same white tile, same sour, clean smell. On the inside of the door, near the bottom, there was a smear of fresh mud, like someone had pushed it open with a shoe from inside while it was already wedged. That was when my optimism finally started having to work for a living. I told myself I was building a ghost story out of janitorial leftovers and broken fixtures. I told myself some trucker had tracked mud in. I told myself I was alone because I had chosen to be alone, and that meant I knew how to handle weird moments on the road. But under all that was another thought that didn't have words yet, just shape. A sense that the building wasn't abandoned. It was available. Then the engine started again. Closer this time. Close enough that the glass doors hummed faintly. I spun toward the front windows so fast I felt a pull in my neck. Still no car in the lot, still no headlights by the entrance. Just my own car, the empty spaces, the hard white wash of the overhead lamps, and beyond them the black field. I walked toward the glass slowly, journal tucked under my arm so tight the cover bent. My mouth felt dry. There was a taste like pennies at the back of my tongue, and I realized I'd been holding my breath long enough to feel lightheaded. That's when I saw the headlights. They weren't on the access road. They weren't coming down the exit ramp. They were out in the dark to the south of the building, gliding toward the lot from the wrong side of the highway where the median dropped into rough grass and drainage ground. No normal car would have used. They moved carefully, almost politely, as if whoever was driving didn't want to startle me before they got close enough. I waited for the rest of the vehicle to appear around them. The hood, the windshield, any shape at all. Nothing, just the lights. I don't mean invisible in some magical way. I mean there was no outline catching reflection, no metal, no body behind them, nothing that made sense of the height or distance. Two beams. Low, steady, advancing. My entire body turned practical in 1 second. Hands cold, chest tight. Knees loose. Every nice explanation I had been feeding myself all night went away at once. And what replaced them wasn't an explanation either. It was just a message. Leave. I grabbed the front door handle and nearly slipped because my palm was wet. Outside, the lot seemed 10 times larger than before. The buzzing lamps, the gray concrete, the trash can by the entrance, all of it sharpened in that ugly overclear way things do when panic strips everything down. I got halfway to my car and dropped my journal. Papers I'd tucked inside it slid out across the pavement. I left them. I got in, hit the lock, missed the ignition once because my hand was shaking too hard, then got the engine started and threw the car into reverse. As I backed out, I looked toward the field again. The headlights had reached the edge of the lot. Still no car. I don't know how to explain the geometry of that. I just know the beams stretched over the asphalt and touched the building wall, and there was still nothing between them. No source I could see. No shape stepping into view either, which somehow felt worse. Like the next part would have happened once I stayed still long enough to witness it. I drove away before I found out. I didn't stop for fuel. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't even stop to pick up the notebook pages that had gone missing, because by then the journal itself was on the floor by my feet and I couldn't make myself care. I merged back onto the interstate too fast, tires whining, and kept my eyes on the road until the first thin gray of sunrise flattened the horizon. Only then did I pull into a busy truck stop, fill up, and sit in the parked car with both hands around a paper cup I never drank from. My shoulders hurt. My throat hurt. My eyes felt gritty, like I'd been awake for days instead of one long night. I opened my journal meaning to record everything while it was fresh, and I couldn't do it. The page where that stop should have gone stayed blank. Every other stop from that trip is in there. That one isn't. I told people later that I must have found some old disused rest area, that I got spooked by lights in a field, that it was probably farm equipment or some highway illusion. I even half believed that for a while, mostly because the alternative had too many missing pieces. But every explanation leaves the same part out. If it was just a car, where was the car? If it was maintenance, why were those doors already propped open? If it was nothing, why did that place feel like it had room prepared for someone to stay longer than they meant to? I think about the near miss more than anything else. Not what I saw, but how close I came to waiting 1 minute longer out of politeness or curiosity or because I wanted a better story for the journal. That's the part that lives with me. Not the building, not the clock. The fact that I almost stayed to see what arrived when the lights reached the door. I still travel alone sometimes. I still keep a notebook. Though not at every stop anymore. There are gaps now. Blank pages where I tell myself the details aren't important. That's not true. The truth is there's one kind of place I won't write down at all. Empty public buildings with their lights on after midnight. Rest stops that look usable from the road. Doors that have been unlocked for longer than they should have been. And I still don't know if I'd stayed long enough for those headlights to reach the building, what would have stepped out instead of a car. I skipped that stop in my journal, but I never really left it there. That's the problem with road stories people tell, like they're funny or weird or maybe just unsettling if you catch them late enough at night. Some of them don't end when you pull away. They just stop having witnesses. For a while after that trip, I started noticing how many roadside places are open in ways that don't feel active. Lights on, machines humming, a door unlocked, nobody visible. I used to read that as convenient. Now I read it as exposure. I still have the notebook from that trip. There's one page near the middle where the paper is scuffed and bent because I dropped it on the pavement running for my car. Sometimes I'll flip to that blank space where the entry should have gone and try to decide whether leaving it empty was me protecting myself or preserving evidence. I don't know. I just know some places don't feel abandoned. They feel between uses, and once you understand the difference, the road gets a lot longer after dark. Story 2. The same car every mile. The worst part wasn't when I realized the car had been behind me for hours. It was the moment I stopped on the shoulder and it stopped too, still way back there, keeping the same impossible gap like we'd rehearsed it. No horn, no flash of lights, no attempt to pass, just the engine idling in the dark while I sat there with my phone in my hand, waiting for a stranger to do something I could explain. When I pulled back onto the highway, it did too. Same distance. Same speed, like my motion was the only thing it needed from me. My name's Mallory Trent. I was 31 when this happened, and I am not one of those people who enjoys driving alone at night. I do it if I have to. That's it. This trip was one of those had-to situations. A long drive through Nevada after a family thing in California, trying to get back home on a deadline that made stopping over feel more expensive than just pushing through. I share my live location whenever I do drives like that. Always. My friend Jules gets a text before I leave, Another when I stop, and if it's an overnight stretch, she keeps the location link until I say I'm inside somewhere with a locked door. That night I was on a 2-lane highway out in rural Nevada, well past the kind of towns that still feel like towns. It was around 11 at night when the empty part really started. No gas stations open, no houses near the road, no ambient light at all once the last little cluster of buildings dropped away behind me. Just my headlights pushing over the asphalt, the steady hum of the tires, and that dusty heated smell you get when the road has held sun all day and is only just starting to let it go. I had my navigation going mostly so I could see distance markers and feel less alone. I was sipping from a bottle of water that had gone warm and plasticky, and every so often I'd send Jules a quick voice note. Just dumb little things so if I sounded sleepy she'd know. I was tired but not dangerously tired. I know that feeling. This wasn't it. I was alert enough to keep adjusting posture, cracking the window a little for cool air, changing playlists. The only other car I could see for a long time was behind me. At first it was nothing, just headlights in the mirror far enough back that they looked small. That's normal. Roads don't belong to me. People travel at night. I remember actually feeling a little relieved to know there was somebody else out there, even if they were behind me and not in front. It made the road feel populated in the bare minimum sense. Maybe half an hour later I noticed they were still there. Not catching up. Not falling back. Same distance. Same 2 points of light in the mirror, low and steady. I checked my speed, slowed a little because I don't like feeling paced, and watched them adjust too. Not dramatically, just proportionally. The gap didn't close. I immediately started doing what I always do, which is thinking up explanations faster than I need them. Maybe they had cruise control set a little below mine and we just happened to match after I changed speeds. Maybe they were as nervous as I was and liked having another car on the road to anchor off of. Maybe I only thought the distance was identical because looking in mirrors at night flattens everything anyway. I even said it out loud, just to hear something sensible. It's a highway, Mal. Relax. I texted Jules that there was one car behind me for forever and added a laughing emoji because I didn't want to turn my own nerves into an event. She sent back, weird but probably fine, keep me posted. Probably fine became my religion for the next 2 hours. The road out there curves more than people think. It isn't just a straight line through desert. There are long bending sections, occasional passing lanes, stretches where the dark on either side seems to rise and dip like land breathing. Through all of it, that car stayed back at the exact same kind of distance, close enough that I never lost the headlights, far enough that I couldn't make out make or model. When I eased off the gas going into a curve, it eased off too. When I sped up on the straighter parts, it matched after a beat. That's where my brain split in two. One part of me kept saying this was absolutely explainable. Drivers pace each other without meaning to. It happens all the time. The other part kept doing ugly little pieces of math. If I changed by 5 miles an hour and they changed by 5 miles an hour after a delay, and then I did it again and they did it again, how many times does that have to happen before coincidence turns into choice? I changed lanes once when a passing section opened, not to pass anybody, just to test the feeling I had. The road was empty ahead. I drifted left, counted maybe 3 seconds, then watched the headlights behind me move left too. Not fast, not urgent, just enough. I moved back right. A few seconds later, they moved back right. My fingers tightened on the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I made myself loosen them. My chest was doing that annoying shallow breath thing that always makes me feel stupid, because once I notice it, I can't stop noticing it. I turned the air colder. I told myself again that tired people assign patterns to random behavior all the time. I told myself a driver following another driver's lane choice at night isn't automatically menacing. It can be practical. Vision is better. Road placement feels safer. Then I checked the location app. Jules could see my dot moving along the highway, and on the screen behind my dot there was nothing. No traffic icon. No other device nearby. I know those apps aren't radar. I know they don't show every car. But seeing empty space behind me on the screen while those headlights sat in my mirror made something in my stomach drop hard. I sent Jules another message. "Can you still see my location?" She replied immediately. "Yes. You okay?" I wrote, "There's a car behind me that's been there forever and the map looks empty." Then I deleted it and sent, "Yeah, just bored." That's the kind of thing I do when I don't want to sound dramatic. I hate hearing myself sound dramatic, especially if I'm wrong. It makes me double hesitate. It makes every decision take longer because now I'm also trying to manage how ridiculous I'll feel later. So I kept driving. Midnight came and went. The desert air leaking in through the cracked window smelled like dust and old stone. My tires hummed the same note for miles at a time. Sometimes the highway markers flashed past in the beam of my lights like little white bones. Every 10 minutes or so I'd check the mirror and get the same answer. There. Still there. I tried changing speed more, obviously. I dropped down enough that a normal driver would have either closed the gap or passed when they got annoyed. The car slowed proportionally. I sped up to a pace that made me uncomfortable. After a moment, it sped up too, never closing, never leaving. I started narrating things to myself under my breath, not because it helped, but because silence had started feeling like space the car could enter. Next bend. Sign on the right. Mile marker. Still behind. Hearing my own voice gave the drive some edges. At one point I thought maybe if I took a turnout or a side road they'd continue on and I'd know I was inventing it. But the idea of turning off a state highway into some darker, smaller road just to test a stranger felt insane. If they were harmless, I'd be making myself miserable for nothing. If they weren't harmless, I would be volunteering for a worse version of the problem. There were a few times I lost sight of the headlights briefly on a curve, and each time I felt a flicker of relief so immediate it almost hurt. Then the lights would reappear at the same distance and the relief would turn sour inside me. Like embarrassment. Like my own body had believed a lie too fast. Just after 1 in the morning, I saw a wide gravel shoulder where the road straightened for a while. No buildings. No lights. Just enough space to pull over if I needed to. My eyes were burning from checking the mirror so much, and I had reached that point where continuing felt as irrational as stopping. I needed to know if the distance was real or if I was losing it. So I slowed, signaled even though there was no one else there but the car, and pulled onto the shoulder. My gravel crunch sounded huge in the night. I came to a stop, hands at 10 and 2 like I was taking a driving test, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in the roof of my mouth. I kept my foot near the gas and watched the mirror. The headlights behind me grew a little brighter as the car approached. Then they stopped, same distance. Not right behind me. Not enough to ask if I needed help. Not enough to pass. Just back there in the dark, engine idling. I couldn't see the shape of the vehicle. Just the glare and the faintest dark block around it. The road between us looked silver in my taillights. I waited maybe 10 seconds. Maybe 30. Time changed shape out there. No movement. I rolled my window down farther and listened. Wind over open land, my own engine. Very faintly, another engine behind me, low and steady, as patient as breathing. No door opened, no horn, no voice, nothing, just someone choosing to be exactly there. My hands started shaking so badly I had to hold my phone with both of them to keep it steady. I called Jules. She picked up on the second ring, sleepy voice turning sharp the second she heard mine. I pulled over. Why would you pull over? Because I needed to know if it was real. What is real? The car. It's still back there. Can it get around you? Yes. It's not trying. That silence from her was awful because it meant she finally heard what I'd been trying not to say. Get back on the road, she said. Don't stop again until you see people. I took one more look in the mirror. The headlights remained exactly where they had stopped, as if they were waiting for me to choose first. I put the car back in drive and pulled out. A few seconds later, the headlights behind me started moving too. Same gap. I drove like that until sunrise. I'm not exaggerating. I didn't stop to use the bathroom. Didn't stop for gas until I saw a strip of actual businesses and a diner lot with pickup trucks in it. The car stayed behind me through every speed change, every bend, every ugly little thought loop in my head. There were moments I convinced myself it had to be some road geometry trick. Moments I decided it was probably a truck farther back than I realized. Moments I almost laughed at. How wound up I was getting. Then I'd check the mirror and the laugh would die before it formed. The worst part of paranoia isn't fear. It's administration. Constant internal paperwork. You have to keep reviewing evidence, refiling it, deciding whether you're a reasonable person or a ridiculous one. By 3 in the morning, I was doing both jobs badly. I tried to get a plate number once when the road flattened out. I slowed just enough to maybe sharpen the image. The car slowed too. The lights stayed too bright. No details. I thought about calling highway patrol, but what would I say? There's a car behind me on a public road. It hasn't approached, threatened, flashed, or tried to pass. It's just existing in a way that's making me sick. I could already hear the answer. Keep driving to a populated area. So that's what I did. A little after dawn, with the sky going from black to that pale, washed-out blue desert mornings get, I came over a rise and saw actual buildings ahead. A gas station with lights on. A fast food place still closed. 2 semis parked near a diner. The relief hit me so hard my hands went weak. I looked in the mirror one more time. The headlights were still there. I turned into the gas station lot without signaling. I wanted to be unpredictable for once. Gravel and cracked pavement jolted the car under me. I swung around near the pumps and finally got to look back down the highway full on. The car never entered the lot. It kept to the road, same lane, same pace, same impossible restraint. It passed the entrance without speeding up or slowing down, just another vehicle moving through morning light. For 1 second I saw the side of it. Dark sedan, nothing memorable. Then it was gone around the bend. I sat at that pump with both hands in my lap because I couldn't trust them to do anything useful. My shirt was damp down the spine. My throat felt raw, like I'd been talking for hours, even though most of the drive I'd been quiet. When I finally went inside, the cashier asked if I was okay, and I said I was just tired because that was easier than finding language for something that had never crossed the line into an obvious crime. I made it home. Life kept going in the obnoxious way life does after something that should have rearranged the universe but only rearranged you. I still share my location on drives. Now I also send the make of my car and the route and the expected gas stops before I leave, like I'm making a little packet for a future investigation I hope nobody ever has to do. Jules never jokes when I tell her a car feels wrong anymore. She just stays awake. And I still check my mirrors too much. Short drives, daytime, local roads, doesn't matter. There's this stupid automatic rhythm now. Mirror, road, mirror, road, mirror. Because what I can't stop coming back to isn't that a car followed me. Cars follow each other all the time. It's why it maintained the same distance even when I was completely stopped on the roadside. If it had been threatening or curious or looking for help, it would have closed the gap. If it had been random, the pattern would have broken. Instead, it held exactly there, like the distance itself was the point. Like whatever that person wanted from me only worked if I kept going first. People like to think danger announces itself. A tailgate, a horn, a man at your window, something you can point to later and say, there. That's when it became real. I don't think that anymore. Sometimes the thing that gets under your skin is restraint. Somebody not doing the obvious thing. Somebody deciding the most intimate way to stay with you is to remain just outside the range where you'd be justified in panicking. I don't know if that car belonged to a person who got bored at sunrise or someone who reached the end of whatever private rule they were following, or someone who does the same thing on roads all over the state and never once has to explain it. All I know is the road still feels crowded to me even when it's empty. And every so often, when headlights sit in my mirror a little too steadily, I feel my thumb reach for the location-sharing app before I've even admitted to myself why. Story 3. The gas station shift change. I knew something was wrong the second time one of them looked at the clock and not at the other guy. That sounds small, I know. But when people are actually switching shifts, they look at each other. They mention the drawer, the receipts, the coffee, some normal handoff thing. These two kept talking like co-workers while their attention kept landing on me. Then the back room, then the front door. By the time I realized the pumps had shut off and the lock was turned, my legs had that dead heavy feeling you get when your body understands the situation before your pride does. My name's Dawn Mercer. I was 44 when this happened, and at that point I'd been driving the same delivery route across state lines for almost 7 years, packaging supplies, auto parts, medical stock sometimes, whatever the manifest said. Not glamorous, reliable. Amarillo was one of those places that sat on my route so often I could tell time by what the sky looked like near the stockyards. I spent a lot of my working life alone, but not in a romantic road warrior way, just professionally alone. Long stretches of highway, loading docks, break room coffee, motel rooms with one painting and a chair nobody ever sits in. Routine is what makes that kind of work doable. Same fuel stops when possible. Same timing. Same food if your stomach's in a mood. On that trip I was outside Amarillo a little later than usual because weather west of there had slowed me down. It was close to closing time for a gas station I use sometimes. One of those isolated places with a couple pumps, a low brick building, neon beer signs buzzing in the windows, and a parking lot big enough for rigs to swing through without much finesse. I only needed fuel, a restroom, and maybe a fresh coffee if it didn't look like varnish. The station sat off the frontage road with nothing but dark flat land around it and the occasional wash of truck headlights from the highway. It smelled like gasoline and burnt coffee before I even opened my door. The neon in the window buzzed on and off with a faint electrical spit. One of the pumps clicked off on its own while I was topping up, then started again when I squeezed the handle harder. I remember muttering at it and checking the hose, more annoyed than anything. Inside, the place looked tired but normal, rotating hot dog case empty except for 2 wrinkled rollers. Coffee on the warmer dark enough to strip paint, lottery display by the counter. Behind the register was a lanky guy in a gray work shirt with a stitched name patch that said Wes. Mid-30s maybe, clean-shaven, tired eyes. He looked exactly like half the attendants at road stations across Texas. Made it just in time, he said, glancing at the clock. We're about to switch shifts. I nodded, set a bottle of water on the counter and told him pump number 4. He looked past me at the windows and said, blue freight truck, right side mirror taped. That caught my attention because he said it before I handed over any card or truck number. But it wasn't mysterious. My truck was parked right outside under the canopy. And yes, the passenger side mirror housing had been taped after a clip on a narrow dock in Oklahoma. It was visible if you looked. That's me, I said. He smiled a little too quickly like he'd gotten an answer he wanted, and started ringing me up. Then he added, you still doing that route west every Thursday? I don't mind telling you my stomach tightened right there. Not enough to make a scene. Enough to notice. Again, there was an explanation. I had used that station before. Not every week, but enough. People in those jobs remember regulars better than regulars remember them. And my route really was close to that same window most Thursdays. It wasn't impossible he'd seen me enough times to connect the dots. So I did what I usually do when something feels off in public. I shrink the reaction, keep things smooth, avoid creating a whole social situation I then have to stand inside. More or less, I said, like we were just making small talk. The bell over the door chimed before he could say anything else, and another man came in carrying a ring of keys. Older, heavy-set, dark mustache, windbreaker half-zipped. He nodded at me, then at Wes. Traffic held me up, he said. All good, Wes said. Just one customer. That should have been the handoff. One leaves, one stays. Instead, they both remained inside. The older guy, who I assumed was the replacement, went behind the counter but didn't start doing anything specific. No counting the till, no checking the cigarettes, no usual fuss. Wes stayed planted near the register, asking me if I wanted a receipt and whether the weather had been rough farther west. I answered because that's what you do when people are being normal at you, but the conversation had a drag to it. Like both of them were stretching it on purpose. I took my coffee and moved toward the little condiment station near the windows, thinking that would be my exit. A minute, 2 tops, then back on the road. I could feel both of them looking over now and then without fully turning their heads. The older guy asked if my run kept me out overnight. Wes asked how far I usually made it before sleeping. Ordinary questions if you don't stack them together. Less ordinary when they arrived that way, one after the other, both of them already knowing enough to make the rest feel too specific. I should have left then. The problem was I didn't have a clean reason, no threat, no direct move, just a bad feeling, and I have spent enough of my life managing bad feelings in public to know how often people punish you for treating them like evidence. So I lingered. Added sugar I didn't want. Stirred coffee I hadn't tasted yet. The older guy wandered to the front door, looked out at the pumps, and then turned the lock. A small movement, quiet. The metallic click carried farther than it should have in that empty store. I looked up automatically. He noticed that I noticed and said, "Casual as you please, wind keeps blowing it open." I glanced at the door. It had one of those heavy hydraulic closers on top. It wasn't blowing open, but again, not enough. Not enough to make me say, "Why are you locking me in here?" Wes started wiping down the counter with a rag that looked already dirty. "Pump acting up again?" he asked me. "Kept cutting off," I said. "Yeah, they've been doing that." At the exact same moment, the lights over the pumps outside went dark. Not the canopy lights. The little indicators on the pump tops, one by one, then all of them. My truck sat out there under the white wash of the main lights, looking farther away than it was. The older guy didn't react. Wes didn't react. That was what changed the temperature in the room for me. If something on your property stops working, you look. You curse. You mention it. These two kept the same loose posture they'd had before. I set the coffee down without drinking it. "Need to get back on the road," I said. Wes gave me a polite shrug. "Won't be a sec." He said it to the older guy, but the older guy was already watching me. That was the first spiral. Fear up, then down. I told myself maybe they were just awkward. Maybe a local crime had them jumpy. Maybe lock the door at shift change was their policy. Maybe the pumps going offline was ordinary and I only hated it because it happened at the same time. I picked up my water. I nodded like everything was fine. I took 2 steps toward the door. The older guy moved casually sideways and opened a cooler, blocking the narrow space in front of it with his body. "Let me just check the latch," he said. He didn't check the latch. Wes asked, "You driving alone tonight?" It was such a simple question. The kind of thing strangers ask truck drivers all the time. But hearing it there, in that sealed-up buzzing station with the empty pumps and both men staying inside long past any normal shift change, I felt every muscle in my back draw, tight under my shirt. "Yeah," I said, because lying badly seemed more dangerous than telling the truth. He nodded once. "Long night for that." I tried the handle anyway. Locked. "Can you open this?" I said. The older guy smiled, not mean exactly, just thin. In a minute, that's the point where a more confrontational person probably would have raised hell. Me, I heard my own voice getting careful instead, smaller, diplomatic. "I've got schedule on this load." "Sure," Wes said. "We're not stopping you." But they were. That was now obvious enough that my body finally caught up. My palms went slick. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not painful, just intrusive, like my own blood wanted attention. The station smelled stronger now. Burnt coffee and gasoline and the sweet chemical note from the windshield washer bucket by the door. I became aware of the backroom hallway beside the counter, a dim little stretch with a beaded plastic curtain and stacks of boxes. Too narrow, too private. Then the second spiral started. The older guy went outside. He unlocked the door, stepped out alone, and left it ajar behind him. Relief hit so hard it actually made me dizzy for a second. I thought, okay, maybe this is all in my head. Maybe he's fixing the pumps. Maybe I'm one embarrassed laugh away from being back on the road. Wes leaned on the counter like a man settling into harmless conversation. You come through next week too? I didn't answer. I was watching the door, watching the older guy stand near the pumps, with his back partly turned, apparently checking something. Then I realized the door was still only half open, and Wes had shifted just enough that he stood between me and the easiest path out. Not blocking, not exactly, occupying. My mouth had gone dry. I said, I'm gonna head out. Wes glanced toward the older guy, just a flick of the eyes, then back to me. Hang on. That glance is what broke it. Tiny thing, but it wasn't the glance of an employee coordinating a repair. It was the glance of somebody checking whether timing still held. I moved fast then, or felt fast. I went toward the door. Wes stepped wider. Outside, the older guy turned from the pump and looked in immediately, like he'd been waiting for that movement. Through the glass, I saw his hand make the smallest signal toward the back room. 2 fingers, barely anything. I stopped cold. My legs had that weak, uncooperative feeling, like the message from my head to my knees was arriving through water. The room seemed too bright and too small all at once. I could hear the hum of the coolers, the buzz of neon, the tick of something loose in the ceiling vent. Wes's rag was still in his hand. That felt absurdly important. Dirty white rag, folded twice. You don't need to rush, he said. I think I muttered something. I don't remember what. I reached for my phone. No signal. 1 bar flickering to none. I moved it higher like that was going to help, then tried again. Nothing. Wes watched my hand. The older guy came back in, shut the door behind him, and this time didn't bother to explain the lock. I backed away from them, toward the chip rack and the window. My chest felt tight in a bad mechanical way, like I couldn't pull in a full breath no matter how hard I tried. Sweat was running under my work shirt down the middle of my back. My fingers were numb and prickling at the same time. I remember thinking, stupidly clear, if they grab me now, no one will hear it over the highway. They didn't rush. That's what made it worse. Patient, almost practiced. Wes kept his voice level. We just need a minute. The older guy drifted toward the side of the room so there wouldn't be a straight path around him. Their spacing changed with each step I took, keeping the triangle. No wasted motion. No argument. Just adjustment. I said louder, "Open the door." Neither one answered. There was a metal display stand by the counter with windshield fluid and shop towels stacked on it. I grabbed one of the gallon jugs without thinking, just because it had weight. My hand shook so hard the plastic crinkled under my grip. Wes's expression didn't change. Don't do that. My throat had gone tight enough that when I spoke the words scraped. Open. The door. The older guy looked toward the back room again. I heard an engine outside then. Sudden and loud, tires on gravel. A vehicle pulling in faster than most people do at a nearly closed station. All 3 of us reacted. Me toward the window. Them toward the sound. Headlights washed the front glass. A pickup. Real. Visible. Dirty white. It rolled crooked to a stop near pump 2, and a man in a cattle cap got out, already digging for his wallet. The whole arrangement in the room broke apart at once, not because either of them panicked, because coordination only works while the scene stays controlled. Wes stepped back from me like he'd never been close. The older guy unlocked the door so fast the bolt clicked twice. I didn't wait for a second chance. I shoved past, shoulder first, nearly lost footing on the threshold, and got out into the gasoline air with my heart battering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The man from the pickup glanced at me, confused, maybe about to ask something. I didn't stop. I yelled, "Pumps are down," because that was the nearest thing to language I had, and kept moving. I was in my truck, door slammed, locked down, engine turning before either attendant made it to the front step. As I pulled out, I looked once in the mirror. Both of them were standing under the station lights, side by side now, not chasing, not waving, just watching me go with the exact same stillness. If the pickup driver noticed anything strange, I couldn't tell. He was bent over the pump, confused by the dead display. I drove until Amarillo proper, then farther, stopped at a truck plaza lit up like a stadium, and sat there long enough for my breathing to stop sounding borrowed. I did call it in eventually, not because I believed much would come of it, but because not calling felt worse. The officer I spoke to was professional, took notes, asked if either man had threatened me directly, asked if they touched me, asked if I wanted to return with a unit and identify the station. I didn't. That route changed after that. Not the company map at first, but mine. I started taking fuel earlier, paying more for busier exits, eating the lost time to stay near people. My dispatcher thought I was being fussy about timing. Maybe I was. Once you've felt what helplessness really is, how little difference there is between a locked door and a polite voice telling you to wait, you start paying extra for crowds. The part that keeps needling at me isn't even what they intended to do. It's how ready the place felt for it. The questions about my truck. The pump trouble. The shift change story. The back room being right there. The signal between them was so small, so familiar. Like a move in a game they'd played enough times not to need words anymore. And that's the question I can't get rid of. Not what would have happened to me if that pickup hadn't rolled in when it did. I know enough not to want details on that. The question is how many other drivers stopped there without someone else arriving at the same moment I did. How many people accepted one more minute inside because they didn't want to seem rude, or paranoid, or difficult. How many of them watched a man lock a front door and decided there was probably a normal reason. After that, road stops started looking different to me. Not more dangerous exactly, more arranged. I notice where the blind spots are now, which exits funnel you past the counter. Whether a person behind the register asks questions that make sense in that order. I notice if someone seems too calm when something breaks. That's the real stain a thing like this leaves. It doesn't just make you nervous. It teaches you a second map underneath the visible one. A map made of timing and doors and whether help can physically enter the room before two people decide you've stayed long. Enough. I still drive for work, though not the same route. Sometimes around closing time, if I pull into a station and see two attendants standing too comfortably in an empty store, I keep going. I don't care if it makes me look unfriendly. I'd rather be rude to strangers than cooperative with a plan I only understand when it's almost closed around me. Story 4. The Ride Share Invitation. By the time the app told me you've already passed me, I had checked both shoulders, the pull-off, the tree line, and the turnout ahead. Twice. There was nobody there. What bothered me wasn't that I couldn't see the rider. It was that the app had already marked the trip as in progress, like a part of the system had decided contact had happened whether I agreed or not. I remember looking at my own reflection in the darkened window for half a second and thinking, no, this isn't a dangerous person problem yet. This is a data problem. I was wrong about the category first, and that's what kept me there. My name's Imani Sloan. I was 28, driving north through California by choice, not necessity. Doing one of those cheap long hauls where you try to split fuel and keep the trip feeling social, without actually traveling with people you know well enough to have strong opinions about. I used a rideshare app for that sometimes. Not every trip, but enough that I knew the usual glitches, the usual user behavior, the usual little etiquette issues. Late replies. Sloppy pickup instructions. People acting like the highway itself is an address. None of that bothered me. Systems get messy on the edges. If you use them enough, you stop expecting elegance. This was in Northern California, just after dusk deepened into actual night, on a highway stretch lined with pines and damp shoulders where the air smells like wet bark and cold. Dirt every time you crack a window. Trucks passed in long bursts, then silence. My car heater had that faint dusty smell it gets the first time you use it after warmer weather. The app paired me with a rider supposedly already along my route, and on paper it looked ideal. Good rating. Clear profile photo. Pickup at a highway pull-off instead of some random side road. Their first message was concise and professional. Timing, landmark, exact side of the road. That alone made me trust it more than usual. I was maybe 20 minutes out when the first weird thing happened. The pickup point changed on the map before I confirmed it. Not by a lot. Just slid a little farther north to another turnout on the same route. I barely reacted. Apps recalculate. People fix their pins. Signal lag happens in wooded areas. I actually appreciated it because the new point looked easier to access. I sent a quick message saying I saw the update and would keep heading that way. Before I hit send, another message came in. Perfect. Keep current speed. I stared at it for a second. The wording was a little stiff, but nothing alarming. I assumed they meant they were monitoring my ETA and wanted to reassure me they were still on track. That's normal enough when someone's waiting roadside after dark. You want the driver to know you haven't wandered off. Still, I made a note of it, not emotional, procedural. Message timing ahead of reply. Possible automated prompt. That's how my brain works when something is off. I don't dramatize, I classify, I troubleshoot. I have enough experience with travel apps, routing tools, and badly integrated systems to know that most weirdness has a boring explanation if you let it finish unfolding. Usually the person who panics first is just the person least familiar with interfaces. So I kept driving. The app's little countdown clock adjusted cleanly as I went. 15 minutes. 12. 10. Pine trunks flickered past at the edge of my headlights. The road shoulder darkened into wet gravel and fern in places, then opened again. Every so often a truck would blow by in the opposite direction. The sound hitting first as a distant rush, and then flattening the whole car with air pressure as it passed. A few minutes later, I eased off the gas because I came up behind slower traffic for a moment. The ETA on the app changed by less than a minute. A message came in immediately. Still good. Arrival in 8 minutes. That exactness bothered me more than the first change had. Not enough to alarm me. Enough to make me look harder. I hadn't updated the rider. I hadn't asked for reassurance. I had simply changed speed and gotten a response matched to it too quickly. I told myself the app was auto-generating updates to the passenger. It probably was. But if that was true, why were they written like direct messages in the same thread rather than system notifications? Why did they sound like someone narrating me to myself? I adjusted speed again, more deliberately this time, a little faster on the straight, then back down, entering a curve. Another message. You'll make the next one. Next one what? Turn out. Bend. Marker. The sentence didn't say. It assumed context. I checked the profile again. Same name, same rating, same photo. Nothing wrong there, no typo-heavy messages, no sudden request to move to a private phone number, none of the normal scam signs. The wrongness wasn't aggressive, it was alignment. The app seemed to know too much about my movement in a way that felt personal while still technically plausible. I cracked the window half an inch. Cold pine air came in, damp and sharp. My hands were steady on the wheel. That's what I remember. No fear yet. More irritation than anything else. I even considered that the rider might be near enough to physically see the road from where they waited, and that would explain the timing. Fine. Great. Efficient even. Then the pickup point moved again. No confirmation request. No apology. It just slid farther ahead. Almost the same distance I would cover if I kept my current pace for another few minutes. I said nope, out loud, but calmly. I messaged, need you to confirm exact location before I stop. The typing indicator appeared instantly. You're almost here. Still no location description, no clothing, no vehicle, no human detail, just proximity. That's where my working explanation started to form, and that explanation was simple. I thought I was dealing with a manipulative passenger gaming the app to keep me from canceling. Somebody moving the pickup pin along the route to avoid missing their ride. Annoying, against policy probably, but human, selfish, ordinary. I built the whole rest of the situation around that assumption. The mistake was that once I had an explanation, I started evaluating everything by whether it fit, not whether it held. I slowed near the next turnout anyway. It was a paved pull-off with a dented sign, gravel apron, dark trees beyond. No person visible, no luggage, no phone screen glowing in the brush, nothing. The app chirped and shifted the pin again, now to a turnout maybe half a mile ahead. My jaw tightened. I finally felt a spark of real anger. I sent, if you're not at the marked point when I arrive, I'm canceling. The response came before I could lock my phone. You're doing fine. Back seat is clear. I didn't understand the sentence at first. Then I did. My eyes cut to the rearview mirror automatically. 2 jackets, a blanket, empty water bottle. Nothing unusual. Then to the passenger seat. Phone cable, receipts, snack bag. It was all exactly as I'd left it because I was alone. The rider had described my car interior without being in my car. Not broadly either, not, I see you have room. Specific. Back seat is clear. As if that mattered to them. As if they had already checked. Something cold and dense settled under my ribs. Not a cinematic jolt. A mechanical drop. My hands didn't shake, they locked harder on the wheel. I looked at the shoulder, at the dark line of trees, at the turnout ahead, and for the first time that night I stopped treating the issue like a customer service problem. I should say this clearly. I still did not think supernatural thoughts. I thought data leak. Stalker with shared access. App exploit. Hidden tracker. Maybe the profile photo was fake. Maybe the rider had seen me earlier at a gas station and followed. All bad options, but all grounded ones. I needed one of them to hold. I didn't stop at the next turnout, I kept going. The app voice announced arriving in that bright, useless tone these systems use for everything. Then a message appeared. You've already passed me. At the exact same time, the app status bar at the bottom flipped to trip in progress. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because my brain rejected the sequence so hard it came out as sound. No, it isn't, I said to nobody. I hit cancel. The screen froze for a beat, then showed canceling, then returned me to the root screen. 3 seconds later, the rideshare banner came back. Trip in progress. I could feel my pulse in both wrists now. Strange place to notice it, but that's where it was. Heavy, insistent. I swiped again. Cancel. Confirm cancel. Report issue. The buttons responded and then failed to change the status. A message arrived, don't pull over. The wrongness of it was finally total. Not because it threatened me. Because it skipped all the normal human friction. No excuse, no apology, no demand. Just a sentence that assumed an active shared situation already existed. I drove another few miles without stopping. The road narrowed between trees. Passing trucks sounded far away and then vanished. My phone showed the route line continuing north while the rideshare bar remained fixed at the bottom like a piece of tape over the screen. I tried force quitting the app at a straight stretch, reopening it, logging out. The trip screen came back. I called support and got put through that cheerful recorded maze that seems designed specifically to make a person feel abandoned by software. By the time I reached a human voice, signal had thinned and the call was breaking. I said I had canceled a ride that still showed active and the rider was sending inappropriate messages. The support agent started from the top of their script asking whether the passenger had entered the vehicle. No, I said. That's the problem. A truck roared past and the line crackled out. Call dropped. I didn't stop trying to solve it. That was the inversion. I thought if I found the glitch, the danger would shrink with it. Instead, every attempt to clarify only removed my explanations one by one. I wasn't dealing with a difficult passenger. Not exactly. I wasn't dealing with a simple app error either. Because app errors don't describe your back seat. And once that explanation died, nothing better took its place. I ended the second half of that drive with less certainty than I started. Not more. I made it to a larger town and pulled straight into a brightly lit grocery lot crowded enough to feel irritating in the best possible way. I parked under a lamp, got out, checked the back seat, checked under it, checked the trunk, checked the passenger side floor, then got back in and deleted the app entirely with my hands still cold from outside air. For a while, even after deletion, the ride notification remained in my phone's recent alerts. Trip in progress. Eventually, it disappeared. I never used that service again. I don't use any shared travel app now unless I'm in a city during daylight and with another person I actually know. Even then, I feel my shoulders tighten when a pin shifts on a map before I've touched anything. The thing I can't resolve is incomplete in a very specific way. If it had been a hacker, I should have found some sign of account compromise. I didn't. If it had been a person who saw me earlier and guessed details, how did the messages keep matching my speed changes before I answered? If it was only the app malfunctioning, why did the ride remain active even after I canceled it and drove hours away? That's the piece that never settles. Not the messages themselves, but the system continuing to behave as if contact had happened and could not be undone. Most bad travel stories are about who gets in your car. Mine is about what acted like it already had. And once you feel that line blur, once convenience starts speaking to you in a voice that sounds almost human and knows more than it should, every clean little interface becomes a place where something can be wrong without ever becoming obvious enough to report. I used to think technology risk was basically transparency. Read the rules, protect your data, watch your settings, and you'll know the kind of trouble you're in. I don't think that anymore. Now I think the worst systems are the ones that keep behaving normally around one impossible fact. The route line was normal. The pickup icon was normal. The little progress bar was normal. That's what made it ugly. It never transformed into some horror movie version of itself. It stayed useful looking while every explanation underneath it peeled away. If there's a next story in all this, it probably starts the same way. Somebody saving money, filling an empty seat, trusting a map because maps feel neutral. That's the trap. Wrong things don't always enter your life kicking the door in. Sometimes they send clear instructions, use the correct icon set, and wait for you to mistake smoothness for safety. Story 5. The mileage that didn't match. What finally unsettled me wasn't the extra miles. It wasn't even the receipt. It was seeing my own handwriting describe a stop in words I absolutely would have used, in a sequence I absolutely would have written, for a place I had never been. That did more to me than any loud event could have. Because once your own records stop proving where you were, every ordinary minute behind the wheel starts to feel retroactively borrowed. My name's Glenn Harwood. I was 58 at the time, and I had been driving long distances for work and family long enough that I trusted a paper logbook more than most people trust cloud backups. Printed columns, mileage, fuel, stop times, route notes, weather if it mattered. I liked records because records settle arguments. If you leave at a certain hour and arrive at a certain hour, and the odometer says a certain number, then the day belongs to facts whether your memory does or not. This happened on a trip through eastern Colorado, the kind of drive that can make a person feel either wonderfully free or quietly erased depending on the weather and how much sleep they got the night before. Open highway, dry wind, dust riding low over fields and places, engine humming steady enough to become part of your body. I was alone as usual and comfortable that way. The logbook sat on the passenger seat with a pen clipped to the cover. Every fuel stop, every mileage check, straight into the book. Nothing elaborate, just methodical. The day began cleanly. Full tank. Odometer noted before leaving. Planned route I remember because I always start a page with the same little ritual. Date at the top, departure point, beginning mileage, weather. There is satisfaction in neat lines. By late afternoon I noticed the total mileage seemed a little high for where I was. Not dramatically, just enough that I did the subtraction twice at the next rest area and frowned. Maybe a small misread at departure. Maybe I copied one digit wrong. Maybe a detour around roadwork earlier had added a bit more than I thought. That was my first response. Not denial exactly. Investigation. I don't dismiss anomalies. I examine them until they either become boring or become something else. So I checked the numbers again at my next fuel stop. Odometer against expected route distance. Still off. Not wildly. Enough. I made a note in the margin. Verify totals at next stop. That's all it was then. A puzzle. Mildly irritating. What matters now is how ordinary the early pieces felt. The dry smell every time I stepped out of the car. The warm plastic of the pen in my fingers. The way the road lay flat and uninterrupted for miles until the horizon itself looked like a seam. Nothing about the drive felt missing. Nothing jumped. Nothing blacked out. I remember singing to myself with the radio low. I remember arguing with a bottle cap that didn't want to thread properly. I remember a hawk lifting off a fence post. The frightening part came later, when the records began assembling a second trip underneath the one I actually lived. At a stop outside Burlington, I opened the logbook to enter mileage and saw an entry already written lower on the page. I don't mean I found a note and forgot making it 5 minutes earlier. I mean there was a complete line in my handwriting for a fuel stop I did not remember taking. Town name, time, gallons, restroom clean, coffee bad. That last part is exactly how I write. Short judgments, practical. No flourish. I stared at it long enough that a man at the next pump looked over like he was deciding whether I needed help. I checked the ink with my thumb. Dry. Not fresh from that moment. The handwriting matched mine down to the way my sevens lean left, and the capital letters pressed too hard on the first stroke. I flipped back a page, then forward, half expecting some sign I'd skipped my place and was reading an older trip. No. Same day. I did not panic. I got curious. That's important. Curiosity is what kept me in it. My first thought was that I had made the entry absent-mindedly during an earlier stop and somehow failed to encode the memory. We all do small things on autopilot. I can wash a coffee mug and barely remember doing it. Why not logging fuel? The problem was the details. The listed town was not one I should have passed at that hour. The time written there created a gap that didn't fit my driving pace, and I had a clear sensory memory of the stretch of road during that period. Not blankness, continuity. I began cross-checking everything. I read the odometer, compared it with the fuel receipt in my wallet from the last place I definitely remembered. I checked my dashboard clock against my watch. I calculated approximate average speed over the last segment. The numbers didn't agree cleanly, but not in a way that produced one obvious answer. That uncertainty kept the fear away. As long as there was work to do, I felt in control. Over the next couple of hours, the pattern grew. Another time entry that made no sense. A note for a stop I would have had to exit for, complete with a pump number and the word windy underlined once. Then a mileage jump too large for the straight stretch I knew I'd just driven. Each piece by itself invited a practical explanation. Taken together, they began to suggest a route deviation I had no memory of making. I started saving every receipt separately, putting them in the center console in order. I photographed the odometer at one stop, then again later, as if digital backup might discipline reality. The road outside stayed perfectly mundane. Open land, occasional grain elevator, long low sun turning dust gold. Nothing in the environment announced itself as a threat. That's why the terror became retroactive. The drive wasn't frightening while I lived it. It became frightening as the documentation assembled a version of events that meant some part of it had happened without me. Near dusk, I found another entry. This one listed a stop at a place called Mercer Junction. I had never heard of Mercer Junction. The note beneath it said older attendant, no receipt paper, restroom key on spoon. That detail landed strangely because it was vivid and specific in a way memory likes. A key on a spoon is the sort of thing I'd notice and remember. Yet there was no image in my mind attached to it, just the sentence in my own hand. I pulled over at the next safe turnout and laid the book open across the steering wheel. My chest had started doing that uneven expansion thing where you have to think about finishing a breath. Sweat was collecting under my shirt collar even though the air outside had cooled. I went through the day line by line, mouthing times to myself. Departure, known fuel stop. Rest area, another known stop. Then these inserted waypoints. These little domestic observations from places that didn't belong to the map in my head. A sensible person could say fatigue. Micro-sleep. Stress, confabulation. I considered all of that. I considered early memory trouble, which was not a pleasant thing to consider alone on a highway. I even called my daughter for no other reason than to hear whether I sounded normal to somebody else. I didn't mention the logbook. We talked about her dog. I sounded fine. That helped for maybe 20 minutes. Then I opened the glove compartment looking for a pen and found a receipt folded twice. It was from a gas station I had never seen. Time-stamped during a stretch when I know I was driving continuously because I had a fresh memory of listening to a particular song cycle on the radio during that exact interval. The station name meant nothing to me. The town name matched one of the unexplained entries, and the pump number on the receipt was listed as Pump 9. My hands went unsteady then. Not dramatic shaking. Fine motor failure. Enough that the receipt crackled audibly because I couldn't hold it still. My throat had tightened to the point where swallowing took effort. I looked up through the windshield at the empty road in front of me and had the sudden clear thought that I needed to stop solving and start leaving. That was the pivot. Investigation had brought me right to the edge of the thing, but understanding no longer felt protective. It felt like standing too close to machinery. I changed my route immediately. There was a more direct path to my destination that cut out every non-essential stop if I managed fuel carefully. I took it. I did not pull into another station. I did not use another restroom. I did not open the logbook again until I arrived. Every sign I passed after that looked suspect, not because it was sinister in the moment, but because I had begun to wonder how many of the ordinary miles behind me contained unnoticed substitutions. When I got in that night, I spread everything out on the motel bed. Logbook, receipts, phone photos, road atlas. I built the day again from artifacts like a crash investigator. Some pieces aligned, some refused. The false entries, if that's what they were, increased in specificity as they went. The first had just mileage and fuel. Later ones included details like sticky floor by cooler, clerk with bandaged thumb, men's room mirror cracked in corner. Gradual reveal. The alternate route in my own record seemed to become more confident the longer it existed. I didn't sleep much. Over the next week I checked the towns. Some existed. One did not. I called one station named on a receipt. A woman answered and confirmed they had sold fuel at that time, yes. I asked how many pumps they had. She said 8. I asked again to be sure. 8. The receipt in my hand said Pump 9. That, more than anything, hollowed me out. A fake receipt would likely use a plausible number. A memory slip wouldn't generate a physical slip at all. A clerical error didn't explain the logbook lines written in my own clipped style and my own pen pressure with observations I'd have made if I'd been there. The details didn't explode outward into a grand theory. They narrowed. They became more concrete and less explainable at the same time. I stopped logging mileage after that trip. Cold turkey. Close the book halfway through the next page and put it in a drawer. If you think that sounds like giving up, maybe it is. But there comes a point where documentation stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like an invitation for the missing parts to write themselves in. I also cut back on long solo drives. Not because I thought the highway itself was haunted or whatever people want to call it when they don't like uncertainty, because I no longer trusted uninterrupted stretches of time to stay single. That's harder to explain to people. They understand fear of strangers. They understand bad weather and blowouts and fatigue. They don't understand what it does to a person when a calm, ordinary afternoon begins generating evidence of a second journey running under the first. And the question I never solved is motive. Not why my memory failed, if that's what happened. Why the receipt lists a pump number that doesn't exist at that station when I later check it. Why add an impossible detail to something that already shouldn't have existed? Why the false route, if false is even the word, became more detailed the farther I drove? If someone wanted to tamper with my records, why make them almost right instead of absurd? The almost is the part that lingers. I still have the old printed logbook. Sometimes I open it and look at those entries, and the frightening thing is how natural they feel. Like notes from a man having a completely ordinary day, not a cry for help. Not a warning. Just a record. That's what makes the whole thing hard to put down. The horror didn't happen in flashing lights. It happened in hindsight, in columns and timestamps. In the quiet assembling of a route I never meant to travel and still can't prove I didn't. Age doesn't make you calmer about everything. In some ways it makes you easier to frighten because by then you've had enough normal days to know exactly how stable they usually are. You can feel when one has been tampered with. That's the part I carry now. Not dread in the moment, but distrust afterward. If I lose an hour, if I can't place a receipt, if a trip total looks even a little strange, I feel that old pressure in my chest and I see those neat lines in my own handwriting. Describing a coffee I never drank. I've been asked why I don't just throw the logbook away. I don't have a satisfying answer. Maybe because I'd rather have the evidence than the blank spot. Maybe because without it I'd start wondering whether I invented the whole thing. Or maybe because some part of me is still investigating, even now, and doesn't want to lose the one physical object that kept becoming more specific the longer I looked at it. I just know there is a drawer in my house I open carefully, and inside it is a record of a road I didn't take, written by a version of